Welcome back to a special virtual Money Mind Exchange panel. We're discussing strategies for investors in 2022. Where should you put your money in a climate of change? Well, joining me for this segment are Howie Lee, economist at OCBC, and Terence Wong, CEO of Azure Capital. Howie, let's start with you. Tell me about those oil prices. We've had this long period of this status quo that ended in 2021 on this sort of trend of rising prices. And analysts just can't seem to agree on whether, we're going to be able to hit that US $100 per barrel again anytime soon. Where do you see oil heading for 2022?
When we look at what we call the stock-to-use ratio, the amount of stocks left globally, the consumption patterns that we see globally, those look very tight. In fact, I think it's the tightest since the shale boom. It's not at the level since pre-shale days, but by that logic, I think we should be seeing a level of around $90 to about $100 a barrel at this point of time. There are other supporting factors as well. The Omicron fears have resulted in excessive selling. I think we might see some buying interest in 2022. Put it all together, I think there is a possibility that you might see $100 oil in the new year.
And speaking of those rising prices, inflation's been a top concern for 2021. We anticipate that's going to just continue for this year as well. How will these rising oil prices, though, affect the level of inflation that we'll see for 2022, Howie?
Well, for sure, it will affect inflationary pressures. I think you just have to look at the last 4 to 5 months of 2021. The largest component of price increase in the US was gasoline prices. Even in Singapore, the fuel and utilities basket has been rising about 5 to 6% year on year each month since July. And I think if oil prices and gas prices continue to remain high in 2022, even on a year-on-year change, it may not look like much, but it will start to trickle down into cost of production, which will then flow down into consumer prices.
Terence, as companies and governments move towards net zero, what about the ESG theme for 2022? Where are we going to see this move?
In fact, the numbers are very, very telling. Over a quarter of the global fund inflows are into ESG-themed investments. And every day, we're actually seeing 2 new ESG funds launched. I think that this green revolution when it comes to finance is here to stay. There are 2 distinct classes. One is the more mature ones, like say solar, wind energy, more established, more mature. So the PE and the price to book, they are pretty much in line with the market. But you're talking about things like EVs, electric vehicles, right? That's a different ballgame because they don't have any earnings to speak of. Their price to book is significantly higher than that of the market. So I would say that, investors should be cautious at this stage in what they're investing in.
Where do you anticipate interest from investors as far as sustainability bonds are concerned?
If you want to attain the goals of Paris Agreement, which is quite tough, we are not going to limit to 2 degrees Celsius increase. That involves, I think, like $3 trillion US dollars every year all the way to 2050. And a lot of this money is coming through via green bonds. And the numbers are very, very encouraging. If you look at the amount of money raised by green bonds, for the first time in history, it has surpassed fossil fuel bond raise. And I think that there's no looking back. By 2023, United Nations or WEF, they have estimated that there's going to be $1 trillion US dollars worth of money that's going to be raised via green bonds.
The green economy has certainly made the investment landscape a lot more interesting for investors, but there are those traditional safe havens as well. Howie, what about gold?
Well, I think for gold, the market is quite split on 2 camps. I think there is one camp that is really worried about inflation, persistent inflation, and that would be the bullish camp, right? You need gold as a safe haven to hedge against those fears. And on the other, we are all very aware that the US Federal Reserve and major central banks are going to embark on their rate hike exercise beginning in 2022. And that is on the bearish camp. So if you were to ask me, and that is my personal opinion, I would be more on the bearish camp, strictly because I think the theoretical side of things is going to stick more than the inflationary fears. And with every hike that the US is going to partake in, I think that will push gold downwards. I think we see a steady state level of gold in the new era of about $1,500 per ounce, and I think we might see that by the end of 2022.
Terence, what kind of strategy should investors be adopting for 2022, depending on their risk profile, of course, because not all investors are cut from the same cloth? What would you specifically say to those who are more risk averse and those that really want to take the jump here in 2022?
Well, I think 2022 is plagued with a lot more uncertainties compared to 2021. There are certain issues that have cropped up that I think will actually weigh on the market. One of them is inflation. We've seen like record numbers over the last couple of months. And we're talking about 6 to 7% over in the US. In Singapore, we are not very far behind. Rate hikes will be coming, and if there's going to be a pullback in terms of liquidity, that is going to be detrimental for the market. So for the risk averse investors, you can huddle in the defensives. There are, Singapore is really a playground for the value, for basically value stocks. The dividend yields are very, very high compared to our neighbors. We're talking about north of 4% dividend yields. We do have many interesting REITs out there for investors to pick from, and manufacturers, traditional manufacturers, which have been dishing out very good dividends. They have very, very strong cash flows. I think these are some of the companies that investors can also think of looking at. For the more adventurous, risk-taking investors, possibly you can look at inflation hedges like property companies. I think that many of them are still currently undervalued, and also reopening plays. Some of the guys that have been bashed out, the hospitality plays, some of the aviation companies will look interesting.
And on that note, I'd like to thank my guests, Howie Lee, economist at OCBC, and Terence Wong, CEO of Azure Capital, as well as all my other guests today. And thank you for joining us.